The operator kills the engine. In the sudden silence of the Norman countryside, 18 kilometers southwest of Cannes, the only sounds are birdsong and the idle of a distant tractor. The construction foreman approaches, boots squelching in spring mud. What the machine has exposed is not bedrock or clay, but concrete, a slab of reinforced poured concrete, weathered and root-cracked, but unmistakably man-made. The foreman crouches, brushes away soil with his gloved hand. The concrete bears no markings, no visible seams. He pulls his phone from his pocket, dials the site's supervisor. Within an hour, the construction has stopped. By evening, representatives from the Department of Cultural Affairs have arrived, along with a historian from the Memorial Museum in Cannes. The historian, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging from a lanyard, kneels at the edge of the excavation. She traces the concrete's surface with her fingertips, noting its thickness, its angle of descent into the earth. She has seen this before, not here, but in archives, in grainy photographs, in the fading memories of veterans interviewed decades ago. This is wartime construction, German wartime construction. The decision is made to continue carefully. Over the following 3 days, archaeologists work with hand tools and brushes, following the concrete down through 70 years of accumulated earth. They uncover a ventilation shaft, its steel grill rusted into lace. Then stairs descending into darkness. The entrance has been deliberately collapsed, packed with rubble and earth, sealed as though the builders never intended for it to be opened again. On the 4th day, they break through. The air that escapes is stale, thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust and something else. The peculiar staleness of a space untouched by human breath for 3/4 of a century. Flashlights probe the darkness, revealing a corridor. The walls are concrete, marked with the impression of wooden formwork. The ceiling is low, reinforced with steel I-beams, and everywhere the silence. They enter slowly, documenting each step. The corridor extends 12 meters, then opens into a larger chamber. The flashlight beams sweep across a scene frozen in time. A room filled with equipment, furniture, and debris exactly as it was abandoned on some desperate day in the summer of 1944. 2. The shadows of June. The bunker had been constructed in haste during the autumn of 1943, when the inevitability of an Allied invasion somewhere along the Atlantic Wall became undeniable to even the most optimistic Wehrmacht planners. It served as a forward communications post for the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, positioned to coordinate armor movements in the event of a landing between the Orne and Weir rivers. The structure itself was typical of secondary command posts hastily erected across Normandy in the 18 months before D-Day. Reinforced concrete walls 1 meter thick, sealing depth of 2 meters of poured concrete and earth, designed to withstand anything short of a direct hit from heavy ordnance. The main chamber measured 8 meters by 6, with 3 smaller rooms branching off, a communications room, a map room, and sleeping quarters for the 6-man crew who manned it in rotating shifts. In early June 1944, the bunker hummed with the tension of waiting. Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt commanded the post. 41 years old, a veteran of the Eastern Front where he had earned the Iron Cross First Class at Kursk, he moved through the underground space with the economical movements of a man conserved energy in confined places. His uniform, field gray tunic with SS runes on the collar, showed where at the cuffs and elbows. His face, illuminated by the weak light of electric bulbs powered by a diesel generator housed in an adjacent chamber, bore the gauntness common to men who had spent too many months in underground facilities. The communications room contained 2 torn.fu.B1 radio transceivers, their dials glowing amber in the darkness. Oberfeldwebel Ernst Schaefer sat before them, headphones clamped over his ears, one hand resting on the Morse key while the other transcribed incoming signals on a message pads. He worked with the automaticity of thousands of hours of practice, his face expressionless as coded streams of intelligence flowed through him onto paper. The map room held a large table covered with 1 to 25, 000 scale tactical maps of the Calvados region, marked with colored pencils indicating known Allied positions, suspected concentrations, and planned fallback lines. Obersturmfer Martin Kessler, the bunker's intelligence officer, spent his hours there, correlating radio intercepts with aerial reconnaissance reports brought by motorcycle courier from divisional headquarters. He was 26, a former law student from Heidelberg who had discovered an unexpected aptitude for military intelligence. His hands, moving across the maps with drafting precision, were ink-stained and trembling from too much ersatz coffee and too little sleep. The days after June 6 transformed the bunker from a staging point into a bunker in the truest sense, a refuge from an increasingly hostile world above. The thunder of naval bombardment reached them even through 2 meters of concrete, a distant bass rumble that never entirely ceased. The ground trembled periodically as British and Canadian forces pushed inland from Sword Beach, their artillery seeking out any structure that might house German command elements. Reinhardt received and transmitted orders with mechanical efficiency. The division was committing piecemeal into the Allied beachhead, its carefully planned counterattack dissolving into desperate attempts to contain the expanding perimeter. Tank companies reported in with dwindling numbers. Infantry battalions ceased responding entirely. The radio traffic grew increasingly frantic, increasingly terse. June became July. The bunker's crew fell into the rhythmic exhaustion of siege. 4-hour watches, cold rations eaten from tins, sleep taken on folding cots that offered no real rest. The diesel generator coughed and sputtered, running on fuel reserves that dwindled with each passing day. The air grew thick despite the ventilation system, heavy with cigarette smoke and human odors and the electric smell of overheating radio equipment. Schaefer hunched over his radios, logging the death of a division in real time. Messages arrived reporting the fall of Carpiquet Airfield, the encirclement of units around Hill 112, the systematic destruction of everything the SS had built in Normandy. He transcribed each one with steady hands, though his eyes, when he removed his headphones between transmissions, showed the 1,000-meter stare of a man watching the walls close in. Kessler's maps became increasingly annotated with red. Enemy advances, overrun positions, severed communication lines. He worked with obsessive precision, as though the act of recording defeat might somehow make it comprehensible. His uniform hung loose. None of them had eaten a full meal in weeks. Supply lines had collapsed. The motorcycle couriers had stopped coming. In the 3rd week of July, a new type of message began arriving. Schaefer copied them without comment, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. Reinhardt read them alone in his small office, by the light of a single bulb. They were terse, coded, marked with the highest classification. They concerned the elimination of evidence, the destruction of records, the permanent removal of witnesses to certain operations conducted behind the front lines during the invasion's early days. The Hitlerjugend division had acquired a reputation even among other SS units. Teenagers raised in the Hitler Youth, fanatical and brutally efficient, they had participated in actions in the villages around that would later be investigated as war crimes. The orders now arriving at the bunker pertained to these actions, specifically to ensuring that no written records survived German retreat. Reinhardt spent an entire night burning papers in a metal drum. The smoke rose through the ventilation shaft, dissipating into the Norman darkness. He fed personnel files into the flames, operational logs, after-action reports, anything that might connect specific units to specific locations on specific dates. The paper curled and blackened, dissolving into ash that he stirred with a steel rod until nothing remained but powder. But some documents he did not burn. Some, a handful of orders, a roster of names, several sheets of operational correspondence marked with official seals and signatures. He placed in a leather satchel and locked in a steel document safe bolted to the wall of the communications room. Perhaps he meant to destroy them later. Perhaps he believed the bunker would remain operational, that somehow the Wehrmacht would stabilize the front, that these papers would be needed for post-war accounting. Or perhaps, in some small corner of his mind, he wanted evidence to survive. 3. The last transmission. The end when it came, arrived with surprising speed. On July 25th, the Americans launched Operation Cobra. 3,000 aircraft dropped 7,000 tons of bombs on German positions south of St. Lo, obliterating the 5th Parachute Division and tearing a hole through which Patton's Third Army would pour into Brittany and beyond. The news reached the bunker via fragmentary radio reports, Schaefer's face growing paler as he transcribed the cascading disaster. Within 48 hours, the entire Normandy front began to collapse. The bunker received its final orders on the morning of July 28th. The message was brief, encoded in a cipher that Kessler spent 20 minutes breaking. When he finished, he sat staring at the decoded text for a full minute before taking it to Reinhardt. The order directed all secondary command posts in the Cannes sector to evacuate immediately and rejoin their divisions for a fighting withdrawal to the Seine. All equipment not portable was to be destroyed. All facilities were to be rendered unusable to the enemy. No exceptions. Reinhardt read the order 3 times. Then he looked around the bunker, at the radios, the generators, the maps, the steel safe on the wall, and understood that his war had reached its terminus. They worked through the afternoon preparing for demolition. Schaefer dismantled the radio equipment with careful hands, removing tubes and crystals that might be salvaged. Kessler rolled up his maps, though they both knew the maps were useless now. The positions they depicted no longer existed. The 2 junior enlisted men who completed the crew, both teenage radio operators who had never spoken much, packed their personal belongings into rucksacks with the blank faces of young men who had already seen too much. As evening fell, they placed demolition charges. Reinhardt had been provided with 3 Tellermine 43 anti-tank mines for the purpose of demolition. He positioned them carefully, one in the generator room, one in the main chamber, one at the base of the stairwell. The fuses were set for a 2-hour delay, time enough to exit the bunker, cross the fields, and reach the road where a vehicle was supposedly waiting to transport them back to divisional positions. At 18:30 hours, Reinhardt took one last walk through the facility. The lights still burned, powered by the generator's last reserves of diesel. The air was stale but breathable. In the communications room, the radios sat silent, their dials dark, their frequencies abandoned. On the wall, the steel safe remained locked. He had not opened it, had not removed the documents inside. Perhaps he had forgotten. Perhaps he had decided that what lay in that safe was already entombed, already beyond judgment or consequence. He activated the first fuse at 18:47 hours, the second at 18:49, the third at 18:51. The 5 men ascended the stairs into the golden light of a Norman summer evening. The sky was clear, the air warm. In the distance, they could hear artillery, American artillery now, walking forward in preparatory barges, claiming the landscape meter by meter. They moved east, away from the bunker, across fields of wheat that grew wild and unharvested. None of them looked back. Behind them, the ventilation shaft exhaled its last breaths of stale air into the gathering dusk. At 20:47 hours, the charges detonated. The explosion was muffled, underground, but powerful enough to cause the earth to heave. The stairwell collapsed inward. The entrance filled with rubble and shattered concrete. The ventilation shaft, its structural supports compromised, folded in on itself. Within minutes, the only indication that anything had existed, there was a slight depression in the ground and a smell of dust and cordite that dissipated on the evening breeze. The wheat grew back over it. Seasons passed. Farmers plowed and planted, unaware of what lay 3 meters beneath their tractors. The war ended. The dead were buried. Survivors scattered. The bunker became just another invisible scar on a landscape covered in them, forgotten except in classified files that moldered in archives that few people consulted and fewer still understood. For 70 years, it waited in darkness. 4. Excavation. The investigation team enters the main chamber wearing protective gear and carrying high-intensity LED lamps that turn the darkness into harsh, shadowless white light. The scene they illuminate is one of suspended time. Dust coats every surface in a fine gray powder, but beneath it, the bunker's contents remain remarkably preserved. The concrete walls have kept the space relatively dry. There is rust, decay, the slow entropy of decades, but the essential structure of the abandoned post remains intact. The radios sit on their table, tubes shattered, casings cracked. The archaeologists photograph them from multiple angles before carefully cataloging each component. These are torn.fu.b1 sets, standard Wehrmacht issue for forward communications posts. Their presence alone tells a story about the bunker's purpose. The maps remain on the plotting table, though moisture has caused the paper to adhere to the wood. A specialist carefully separates them, revealing the colored marks and annotations. The maps show defensive positions around Cannes, dated to late June and early July 1944. Some positions have been crossed out in red pencil. Others are marked with question marks. The handwriting is precise, controlled, the work of someone trying to maintain order amid collapse. In the sleeping quarters, they find personal effects. A Wehrmacht field cap, its eagle insignia still visible despite corrosion. Mess tins, a portable chest set with pieces scattered across a folding board, a game abandoned mid-play. A leather-bound notebook filled with handwriting in Old German script. One archaeologist, herself German, spent an hour transcribing what turns out to be poetry, verses about home and winter and the particular quality of light through pine trees, written by someone homesick and probably very young. But it is in the communications room that they make the discovery that transforms the excavation from historical curiosity into something more complex. The steel safe has survived intact. It takes a specialist with cutting equipment 2 days to open it without destroying the contents. When the door finally swings open, they find a leather satchel inside, damp but fundamentally sound. And inside the satchel, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, documents. The papers are removed to a laboratory where archivists and historians work under controlled conditions to separate, photograph, and transcribe each sheet. What emerges is fragmentary but damning. Operational orders from late June 1944, correspondence between field commanders and divisional headquarters, and a roster of names, German names attached to specific units and specific actions. Several documents reference operations conducted in villages northwest of Cannes in the days immediately following the invasion. The language is euphemistic, bureaucratic, but its meaning is clear to anyone familiar with the terminology of wartime atrocities. Partisan suppression, security operations, elimination of hostile elements, specific dates, specific locations, cross-referenced with existing historical records. The documents confirm long-suspected but poorly documented actions. The execution of French civilians accused of aiding Allied paratroops, the burning of farms suspected of hiding resistance fighters, the systematic intimidation of villages to prevent intelligence gathering by Allied forces. The roster is particularly significant. It lists names and ranks of personnel involved in these operations, information that has been sought by historians and, in some cases, by judicial authorities investigating war crimes for decades. Most of the men named are certainly dead now, but some may still be alive. More importantly, the document provides evidence for historical record, filling gaps in the accounting of what occurred in Normandy during those chaotic weeks. The discovery generates immediate controversy. French newspapers run headlines. Survivors' groups issue statements. German authorities, through official channels, express willingness to cooperate with any investigation. The documents are turned over to the appropriate judicial and historical bodies. But beyond the headlines and official statements, the bunker itself becomes something else. A memorial of sorts, though not one anyone planned or intended. Beneath the soil, the excavation is eventually covered over. The construction project resumes on a slightly modified plan that preserves the bunker site. A small marker is placed. A simple stone plaque noting that a German military installation existed here during the war, that it has been excavated and documented, that its contents are preserved in archives. Visitors come occasionally. Historians, students, veterans, fewer each year, walking with canes or wheelchairs, their memories of 1944 growing hazier, but somehow more precious with each passing season. They stand at the marker and try to imagine what lay beneath. Men in gray uniforms hunched over radios in the darkness, listening to their world collapse in Morse code. The lead archaeologist, a man from a University of Cannes who specializes in World War II installations, writes a detailed report on the bunker's discovery and contents. In his conclusion, he notes something that others have observed, but few have articulated clearly. Europe remains, in a very literal sense, built upon and above the remnants of war. Thousands of bunkers, trenches, command posts, supply depots, and graves still lie beneath the continent's fields and forests and cities. Most will never be found. Some are discovered by accident, by construction workers, by farmers, by children playing in woods. Each discovery pulls into light some fragment of the past, some piece of evidence about what humans do to each other in extremity. The documents from a bunker are eventually published in an academic journal, annotated and contextualized. They add detail to what is already known about the 12th SS Panzer Division's actions in Normandy. They confirm some accounts. They complicate others. They do not fundamentally change the historical record, but they sharpen it, bring it into higher resolution. 3 years after the discovery, a German student working on a dissertation about Wehrmacht communications networks visits the site. She has been researching personnel records, trying to determine what happened to the men who served at various posts around Cannes. She has found records for 4 of the 5 men known to have been assigned to this bunker in its final weeks. Oberfeldwebel Ernst Schaefer was killed during the Falaise Pocket Battle in August 1944, cut down by American machine gun fire while trying to retreat across a river. He was 28. Obersturmführer Martin Kessler survived the war, returned to Heidelberg, and completed his law degree. He practiced as a solicitor until his death from a heart attack in 1973. He never spoke publicly about his wartime service. The 2 young radio operators, boys really 17 and 18 years old, both survived. One emigrated to Argentina in 1949 and died there in 1991. The other remained in Germany, worked as an electrician, and died in 2003. Neither granted interviews about their experiences. Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt's fate is less certain. He was reported missing in action during the retreat across the Seine in late August 1944. His name appears on no prisoner of war lists. No grave has been identified. The most likely explanation is that he was killed during the chaotic withdrawal and buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the French countryside. Another body beneath the soil, another fragment of war that will remain lost. The student stands at the marker for a long time, her dissertation notes in her hand. The field around her is planted with wheat, green and rustling in a June breeze that carries no memory of the summer 81 years ago when this same field was a battlefield. Somewhere beneath her feet, 3 meters down, the bunker remains. Empty now, documented and cataloged and understood, but still there, still waiting in darkness. She thinks about Reinhardt, about what he knew and what he did and what he chose to preserve. She thinks about the documents he locked in the safe instead of burning. Whether it was accident or intention, carelessness or conscience, no one could say. The dead keep their secrets. What remains are fragments, rusted radios, faded maps, documents in an oilcloth wrapper, the testimony of concrete and steel about the men who built and occupied and abandoned this place. And beyond this particular bunker, beyond this particular discovery, the knowledge that similar sites exist by the thousands across Europe, buried, forgotten, waiting for the chance excavator's blade or the erosion of time to bring them again to light. The war ended 70 years ago, but its remnants persist. They lie beneath farmland and forests, beneath highways and housing developments, beneath the accumulated decades of peacetime life. They wait in darkness, these relics of extremity, these testimonies to what was done and what was survived and what was lost. And occasionally, by accident or by intention, they are found. The earth gives up its secrets slowly, reluctantly, but it gives them up. And we, the living, are left to excavate not just the objects, but the meaning to ask what these buried things can tell us about who we were, and perhaps more disturbingly, about who we might become again if we forget what lies beneath the soil on which we stand. The student closes her notebook. The wheat rustles. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marks the hour. She walks back to her car, leaving the marker behind, leaving the bunker to its darkness, leaving the dead to their silence. But the discovery has been made. The record has been amended. The Lost Bunker of Normandy, forgotten for 70 years, has yielded its testimony. And that testimony, however incomplete, however uncomfortable, becomes part of the larger story that Europe still struggles to tell about itself. The story of what happened here, in these fields under these skies when the world broke apart and had to be rebuilt from fragments. The bunker will never be open to the public. It is too unstable, too dangerous, too expensive to preserve. But its contents are preserved, cataloged, available to researchers. And the story of its discovery becomes another thread in the fabric of memory that binds present to past. The wheat grows, the seasons turn. The earth keeps its vigil over what lies beneath. And we, walking on the surface, must remember that the ground we tread upon is never neutral, never empty, never just dirt and rock and root. It is layered with history, with the evidence of what we have done to each other, with the silent testimony of spaces like this bunker, spaces where men waited in darkness for the end, where decisions were made, where evidence was preserved or destroyed, where the machinery of war ground on until it finally stopped. The Lost Bunker of Normandy has been found, but how many others remain lost? How many other sealed rooms, buried documents, forgotten testimonies still wait beneath Europe's soil? The answer is unknowable, but the question persists, as persistent as the concrete that endures underground long after those who poured it have turned to dust. The field is quiet now. The sun is setting over Normandy, casting long shadows across wheat that will be harvested in a few weeks, processed into bread, consumed and forgotten like every other season's crop. But 3 meters down, the bunker remembers, and that perhaps is enough.